Ready for getting the name of this. Hi, I welcome everyone. I am Danny Klein-Modisette with Laughter on Call, and I am delighted that all of you can be with us today to talk about inclusion. What is it? Why does it matter? How do we do it? And I'm so excited that we have experts with us today. I had the very great good fortune to meet Dr. Isaiah Pickens and Dana Griffin, yes, to have this conversation because they know so much about this in very different areas. So we're going to learn about that. But first, allow me to introduce our guests and tell you a little bit about them. Dr. Isaiah Pickens is the founder and CEO of IOpening Enterprises. That's with an I, the letter I. A professional development company that helps organizations retain and grow their employees by transforming work cultures and reimagining success without sacrificing well-being. His unique experience as a clinical psychologist and organizational development specialist is grounded in a career building people and systems. As a former assistant director at the UCLA Duke National Center for Child Traumatic Stress and a former clinical assistant professor at NYU School of Medicine, Dr. Pickens has built a reputation as a national trauma expert and highly sought after specialist for building emotionally intelligent workforces. Boom, mic drop. That's a wonderful thing.
So glad to be here with you, Danny.
Thank you, thank you. And we also have the lovely Dana Griffin, and she is the co-founder and CEO of Eldera.ai, a global intergenerational platform on a mission to respectfully unlock the time and wisdom of older adults as a new natural resource for all generations to thrive. Eldera is the opposite of elder care. It is built on the belief that older adults want and need to care for the next generation. We build technology to safely connect young and old for weekly virtual conversations that concurrently solve two human crises: the mental health of kids and the loneliness of older adults, while offsetting the societal cost of our increased longevity. Dana was raised by her grandparents in Transylvania, Romania, and has been guided by elder mentors throughout her life. A former data and advertising executive recognized by Ad Age as a 40 under 40 changing the advertising industry, Dana became an age tech entrepreneur and AI for good advocate following the death of her closest elder mentor, Linda. She now serves on the board of Bright Focus Foundation and AI Commons and has been advising and speaking internationally about healthy longevity and principled uses for AI for social impact. Yes, you are two of the most socially responsible people I've ever been in a Zoom room with.
We just emit the energy. I can feel it all the ways around. You too, Danny.
Yes, it's fantastic. And so because of your backgrounds that they're so not necessarily philanthropic, but about bringing awareness to difficult circumstances, I'm wondering, as a hello, if you could tell me a little bit or tell us a little bit about what kind of drove you to these areas for yourselves. And we could start with Dr. Isaiah.
All right. Well, thank you for that, because the journey, our stories, I think, are what really drive not only healing from past experiences, but as you said, the philanthropic, the desire to want to connect with others. And, a big part of my story started with my family. I grew up in a family where my parents poured everything into me and really, hoped that all that would bring about pretty much what I've done today in terms of being able to give back to the world meaningfully. But during my journey, I came into contact with so many people who didn't have that same kind of support. I worked at Rikers Island Jail for a while, so that's no skip in the park. I've worked in a ton of different places where people have been exposed to trauma. And I learned that so many people don't get the opportunity to develop the emotional intelligence skills that allow them to heal. And so I felt that throughout my time, I wanted to help people be able to actually have those skills to deal with the frustration of maybe not getting what you want, or the disrespect that you may feel from others, but not know how to manage it in different workplace settings so that people can really feel like they want to stay in those work cultures. But I learned pretty soon that just changing people wasn't enough. People don't necessarily change systems, systems change systems. And
Mm.
that idea of being able to create processes where the workplace is supporting people to feel psychologically safe, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and to really feel like they're empowered to show up in this better way. That's what really sustains a culture around that. And so that's why I really dove into this area that I'm in.
Wow, wow, that makes total sense. Fantastic. Okay. And Dana?
Well, I deal with everyone Dr. Isaiah doesn't deal with.
Say more
All the
about
people
that.
still there.
Yeah, let's hear more
Okay.
about that.
Let's let's go from the beginning. So I was, as you mentioned, I was born and raised in Transylvania. I was raised by my grandparents, and older adults have played a pivotal role in my life. I navigate life by knowing who to go to for advice on anything from, career to healthcare to cooking and to dating. And I thought, yeah, and then I have some stories on that. Definitely do not ask for dating advice from 94-year-old Ethelyn Trouble, middle name Trouble. Yeah. Anyways, so, I thought everyone navigated life like this. And I didn't realize how incredibly fortunate I was until my closest elder mentor and mother figure to me in New York, Linda, ended up getting brain cancer and passing away a few years ago. And when she did, I realized what an incredible gift I've gotten from her. And I wanted to build something that not just celebrated her memory, because Eldera is built in her memory, but also that gave every young person a Linda as well. Because, there's so much research around this. There's a research particularly that I'm thinking about from Harvard Center for Childhood Development that says that when young people build one-on-one trusted relationships with non-parental adults, it helps them build resilience.
Hmm.
And what else do we need more than resilience? And then the next thought was, all of us grew up in a world where we were told to go out there and change the world, right? Kids today are told to go out there and save the world.
Hmm. Super.
It's a very different responsibility we're putting on them. So we need to make sure that we give them every single opportunity to succeed. And one of the best ways of doing that is by connecting them to someone who they're not related to, but that shows up for them week after week, and they can build a strong, healthy bond together and frankly, imagine a better world together. So that's the impetus behind Eldera. And we've been in market for 4 years. We've got mentors, like Linda was for me, in all 50 states. All of them are criminal background checked. And kids sign up from all over the world because they want that connection. And frankly, they want that warmth of the American older adult, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
it's unique in the world. So so we've been very proud of building Eldera. Eldera stands for Era of the Elders. And we actually use AI to truly tap into this wisdom and time that older adults have to give in a way that's good for them and good for society.
Great. And that's actually what's super interesting because we're, focused on inclusion today. And I know one of the motivators for you was taking on the loneliness of our senior community. And I think it's interesting having you both because I think Dr. Isaiah, it's your background in trauma and emotional intelligence is really now transitioning, you can say more about this, into more of the business space. And who would think that would be something that would be important in a business space? But these feelings of not feeling a sense of belonging, right? And not feeling included. What I find fascinating is that, it's children, it's seniors, it's corporate, like this need for human connection and to feel a part of something seems to be so universal. And the fact that each of you has taken, is taking different ways of getting there but you're addressing this issue of loneliness and isolation and needing to create inclusion. So I think that is super fantastic. So I wonder if you could speak just a little bit about that evolution for each of you of having like this idea and feeling the need, and then actually figuring out, okay, how am I going to execute my vision, if you will?
Yeah, I think, during this journey, for me, a big part of the understanding that we have about ourselves that allows us to really feel like we're accepted is being able to identify what connects us with other people. And sometimes we're not always sure what is disconnecting us. One of the reasons why we chose to call our company IOpening Enterprises, as you can see, it's a play on words, is to really gain some of that self-understanding about what allows you to feel like you fit in different spaces. And so a big part of our work that we do with organizations is we provide trainings that allow them to have a common language on not only understanding what allows you to feel valued, but to communicate that more effectively. We have a program, part of our program, we help people develop psychological safe and brave agreements. These psychological safe and brave agreements refer to building psychological safety, which is the belief that I can manage the stress that's happening around me or reach out to someone who can help me manage the stress. It doesn't mean that you're completely comfortable. You still can feel distress, but you feel like you have the tools to manage the stress. Here's the thing about social connection. It's not always easy. Like do you all know people you don't like? we all know people we don't like, but we still may have to work with them. And the question isn't, can we work with them? The question is, can we manage the distress that may come from us needing to work with them? And so being able to give people skills to sit with that and really be clear about that, and then get resources to manage that stress, allows teams, individuals to keep moving and working together and feel as connected as possible, even when there's a lot of stress and pressure happening around you. And so that's been a big part of what we've helped people do, is have that common language to communicate, hey, this is what helps me fit in, and have the organization understand this is what we can do in order to support that fitting in. Because ultimately what happens when you do that is we take risks when we feel like we belong, right? Think about the people who are closest to you. You'll do something that you might not do around anyone else because you won't be categorized as just that thing because there's one thing they've seen. You'll be able to be seen as your full self. And so the more we create belonging, the more we create innovation and risk takers as well.
I love that. And I want to hear from you too, Dana, but I'm so curious because we have experiences at Laughter on Call. Have you ever had anyone go, what? Like, no.
I've had people go, why? And then what? and it's funny because I think that initial reaction is, I don't know if this fits for me. But then you have to give them enough context around what you're doing to let them know that these types of social connections aren't just touchy-feely for the sake of us feeling connected. It's really allowing us to have a bond that gives us clarity on how we can contribute meaningfully in the workplace and with one another. And it's that contribution to one another and to the workplace that ultimately gets people to a place of individual success, but also organizational success as well.
Yeah, that's very true. And Dana, I'm curious for you too, how, what the kind of, when you initially said, I had this mentor and it was so valuable to me, and now this is my vision for the world. What kind of feedback you got about that?
It's interesting. Well, initially, okay, let me take 5 steps back. Initially, we started 2 weeks after schools closed because of COVID. And older adults were locked in, kids were locked in with their parents. And we thought, well, what if we connect them to take a little bit of a pressure off the parents? And perhaps the older adults can help socialize the kids a little bit while they're locked down. And we didn't even know how long we're going to be locked down. We had no idea what was going to happen. And, the first month I stayed on every Eldera call because we Zoom and we record the Zooms, but I was really curious what was going to happen. So I stayed on every Eldera call, and I realized that there was this need for connection where we match 2 people, they talk once, and then they decided to just talk again at the same time next week. And I was shocked because that's not what I expected. In fact, 94% of the people that we match using our algorithm go on to talking weekly. And I never thought that this would be a solution for loneliness.
Mm,
We actually don't talk about loneliness at Eldera very much. We talk about purpose,
mhm,
because both older adults and young people want to find purpose.
mm,
Uh, and by finding purpose, one of our guiding principles at Eldera is that we never focus on decreasing the bad, we focus on improving the good, which
mm.
means that if we would just focus on decreasing loneliness, we would have less loneliness. But if we focus on increasing purpose and social connection, we erase loneliness and start going on the plus side. So those are some of our guiding principles. Yeah.
And so do each of the participants feel a sense of purpose? Like the young person feels like, I'm doing good in the world, and the older person feels like I'm helping this young person navigate through life. So each one has like an investment in getting on that call.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's why the bond becomes so strong. I mean, we've gotten very good at matching, but the bond between them, we tell people that you come to Eldera because you have something to give. You have a little time to give, you have a little wisdom to give, you have attention to give. And the mentoring is truly mutual.
Mm.
You expect that the older adults impart their wisdom on the young people, but it's also the other way around. In fact, we were just laughing. Every week we have socials at Eldera. And one of the mentors told us that her mentee is a teenager and said, "Hey, did you listen to Taylor Swift's latest album?" And the mentor was like, "No." Like, "What do you listen to?" "NPR." She's like, "That's it, you have homework." Homework, no more NPR. Top 40, I will quiz you. And kid you not, now they're all listening to Top 40, which opens them up to a whole new way of thinking
Right,
and
right.
connecting with the younger generation.
Yes.
And and for the mentors who have grandkids, suddenly now they're cooler with the grandkids because they're learning from their mentees
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
So it's truly a circle, and it works. We didn't invent intergenerational connections. In
Right.
fact, um, we believe that loneliness is a whole new problem that we didn't have until last century with the
Right.
invention of nuclear families and retirement. Because we evolved as a species where the older adults took care of the young people while the middle generation, the sandwich generation, went out and worked.
Mm-hmm.
And that older adults had purpose, that transmitted wisdom, transmitted traditions, social emotional skills, and kids picked all of this up and learned how to deal with society and build resilience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now we lost that connection, which is why we're dealing with the loneliness, global loneliness epidemic, and highest mental health crisis in kids.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
believe that solving it is as easy as reconnecting them in a way that's meaningful to both.
Yeah, my oldest cousin, I think she's 96. She moved in with the son and the grandkids, and is after her husband died, they've lived, and she, she makes breakfast. Yeah, that sense of purpose. And I think it's really interesting. One of the things that we do at Laughter on Call when we're working one-on-one is we get the backstory on the person. So in one circumstance, he was a professor of speech and language. And so the comedian came in as a student as a voice student. And
Yeah.
so he was able to reconnect with his dignity and his expertise. And then it's amazing how much more present. This is obviously early stage, late stage, you can't really access, but in the beginning, again, that sense of purpose and belonging and I matter and I make a difference and all of that is so important. And it's so true what you say. It's true of kids, and it's like it's a lifetime pursuit. And so I think it's wonderful in both cases. So terrific. And I'm actually interested, Dana, in your background, how much your Transylvanian roots have affected. I know you've talked about the influence of your grandparents, but I'm wondering culturally, is there a loneliness issue? Like how, I think you did somewhat just address this in that the nuclear family, I don't know enough about the current culture, so maybe you could speak to that.
My growing up I think there's a big divide culturally between developed, like fully developed westernized countries and developing countries. And it's probably not what you think. In very developed countries, we see a much higher rate of longevity and much lower rate of fertility, which means that in the US today, there's already more people over 60 than under 10.
Right.
And by the time I'm going to be in my 60s, that number will double of people
Yeah.
over 60. You know, what we see in Romania, and I think this is why I feel like we're able to build this company, we didn't see that. We saw, I was raised by my grandkids. People lived together. They didn't move away very far. I'm an exception, you know, in certain ways. So when I moved to the States, it was very interesting to not see the multi-generational family. And then for me, coming from the outside, it was kind of more obvious to see that the loneliness and the mental health issues
Mm.
that people experience today are a result of not having that foundational multi-generational family around you.
Mm.
So I think that's probably how I was influenced. Yeah, but you know, loneliness is becoming an issue with young people in Romania, but it's nowhere near what we see in the US, or the UK has a ministry of loneliness. Japan has a ministry of loneliness.
Wow.
You know, the US Surgeon General came out last year with the National Strategy to Advance Healthy Social Connection when he came out with loneliness being an
Right.
epidemic. And the World Health Organization named loneliness a global epidemic. But it really depends country by country, and it's a cultural effect.
Right. So you couldn't take Eldera to Romania and go, and they would think it was like a genius idea. They'd be like, are you kidding? That's how we live. Why are you, why is this a
And
business?
how wonderful, how wonderful, you know? But truthfully, the most developed countries, with interestingly, the most spending power, have loneliness is a byproduct of this rapid technological development that had to do with like moving for jobs, and so on and so forth. So
I mean,
it's very interesting to see what the effects are. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
I really, Dana, I appreciate you pointing this out because I think it really intersects with, as a culture, how we have become so work focused and we pretty much conflated work with purpose. And they're actually two different things. In Japanese culture, they have a concept called ikigai, where you're understanding your work as a part of your contribution to the world. And there's 4 dimensions to it that really allow you to find social connection and also be able to give your gifts to the world at work and outside of work. And it's contributed to these blue zones, kind of what you were referencing, Dana, these centurions, people who live to be 100. And the question when I think about work, inclusion, purpose is, what are we doing it for? Right? We're doing it so that we could one day be able to spend time with our family or be able to go on vacations, be able to do things that are centered in relationship. And for me, a big part of what I have always wanted to do with IOpening Enterprises, which we find and has been so, I think, an amazing part of our journey, is reinsert a relational approach to work inside the workplace culture. So much of the workplace culture has focused on transactional ways of really valuing people. You do this, then you get this. This is important to, in a capitalist society where I know we're trying to have maximize productivity, but it's not the only way to maximize productivity. In fact, when you actually use relational approaches where you are creating experiences where people feel valued for their whole skill set, not only are they able to do the work, but they feel more confident to bring other parts of their skills to the workforce that can actually accelerate what's being done, or it gives them the confidence to speak up when they don't understand something, so it doesn't slow down the work that's already happening. And part of the way I love what you're doing with Eldera, because we have in our work that we do the training, that's a part of it, but having a common language isn't enough. You need something to make it a little more sticky and for people to be able to connect with each other. So we have something, a part of our program, our Elevate Work program, called Wellness Buddies. And so we actually pair staff together to, first, it starts as a process for them to really have low stakes conversations around their wellness. Part of the reason why people can be afraid to connect is because there's so many high stakes moments, right? I'm afraid of being canceled. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. I'm afraid. But if you create low stakes spaces where people don't have that same pressure and they can just connect with each other, it allows them to get used to talking about some of these issues. But then on top of that, part of what we love about it is it lays the foundation for people to be able to have peer coaching. One of the ways we get better and we have purpose is by getting feedback, but people can sometimes be so defensive around feedback because they think you're seeing them in a way that they don't see themselves. And so what inclusion does is that allows you to create a culture where people are like, they see me either the way I see myself, or if they don't see me the way I see myself, I can correct them without them being defensive. And so this is why it's so important to really build this in over time in the work culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, right? Because we've talked about this. That's exactly what we do, is come in and in a low stakes environment and find humor, and get to those relationships through shared laughter, which of course no one thinks, oh, shared laughter, is that going to improve the bottom line? But it all affects the bottom line, right? It's having those relationships and creating a safe space where people can bring their ideas, as you say, and feel like, yes, we're all this sense of belonging, which, laughter, of course, being one of those tools, right? And then we've talked about all these other, there's a whole battery of tools that can help create that. So it's interesting that we've all had the same impulse. So how
and all came in from different angles as well, I think, around it. And that's the beautiful thing. I think sometimes in our culture, and to what you were saying, Dana, earlier, the idea of developed cultures, especially in westernized culture, you're so focused on competition over cooperation, and it can sometimes be a barrier to having some of the social connections that you need, because you think you're competing with someone when in actuality you may have a shared skill set, you may have shared interests that actually will propel both of you, but you're too busy like, I'm gonna go after them, they better not come for my promotion or whatever it is like that. And so being able to create spaces where people really understand the benefit of cooperation over competition at times, and especially over conquering other people, is, I think, a beautiful part of this journey.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I talk about a lot, because I came from stand-up, right? Like, that was my background. I was a stand-up comic, and the improv tools are very, very different. And one of the primary ones is make your partner look good. Like, what? Like we run all kinds of exercises that are about that, no, there's not only one place at the top, by the way. Like, it's a way of communicating that enhances the other person, because you feel secure enough, and you're going to, there's enough to go around. So that was a big transition for me to make over these last 6 years. And I'm curious, talking to all of you, like to both of you, about the influence of COVID on all of this. Like how, and I know for Dana, like, you started in COVID, like that was how you launched, and the effect that all of that forced isolation had in bringing to the fore how important human connection. I'm not sure we would be having this conversation 7 years ago, for example. So it's some little bit of silver lining through all of the insanity. So I would love to know, like, each of you, your proudest moment. What's something where you just went, oh, I'm on to something here? So Dana,
I'll throw it to you, Dana, first.
Yeah, Dana.
I have to tell you, building Eldera is the biggest honor of my life. And it's not an easy thing at all. But I'm so incredibly fortunate because of my team and because of our community. So everyone who signs up for Eldera becomes a member of our community. Then they share with me how Eldera changed their lives. And, we start every morning at Eldera with member feedback. Incredible. I mean, I'm a crier already. So tears come easily, but I've gotten emails from mentors saying that Eldera is the reason why they get out of bed. And they put themselves together to show up for a kid or to show up for each other, and that then makes them leave the house.
So it's not all virtual. You have
It's all virtual.
It's all.
It's all. So I'll tell you, let me clarify that. we never pair a kid and an older adult in the same geographic area on purpose to keep them safe.
Mm-hmm.
We have a community of older adults, and we have a social platform. After their background check, they're welcome into our social platform. They have socials together, they meet, they talk. They started socializing in person.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mhm.
find each other in their geographic area, and now there are Eldera walking groups, which I love, because one of the key things of being able to age in place is to have a social group around you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're able to create that with Eldera. But going back to well, this is one of my proudest moments. I didn't expect that to happen. I didn't expect people to find each other at Eldera, and they tell me that now some of their best friends are Eldera friends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, we we talk, there's a lot of talk about laughter being contagious, you know what's contagious? Showing up. Like just showing up. So the fact that they have to get themselves together for their Zoom call, well, they're already together. They've shown up for that. It encourages you to then show up for the walk, to show up for someone else. So it's so interesting how this kind of engagement has ripple effects beyond the moment, you know?
Yeah, and that's the point. And that's the point. Sorry. And another thing I wanted to mention is we did right now we're direct to consumer, but we did a pilot with Miami-Dade School Board to offer Eldera as a social emotional program for kids, for high schoolers in particular. And two of the high schoolers moved away, and they both reached out to ask me if they can bring Eldera to their new schools. And I cried, obviously, again.
I love that you cry all the time. I cry all the time.
Hey, I get some tears too. Don't leave me out the equation. You know, a brother can cry a little bit every now and then.
You're included in the crying.
Thank you, thank you. Let's all get it together.
Yeah. So I think those are some of the things that I'm proudest about. But I also realize that we're just getting started.
Yeah.
We understand that, older adults are for some reason seen as a cost center by society because we're just not used to our increased longevity. And we see them as a resource. And one of the things you brought up, COVID, and how has COVID impacted our work? One way it's impacted it is that technology is much more ubiquitous among both older adults and kids. And interestingly, if you ask older adults, are you technologically savvy? They will tell you they're not. Absolutely not. But if you ask them if they Zoom, they're like, of course I Zoom. So it's really important to think about the question that you're asking and how you relate to people. And then once you understand that there are these brilliant older adults out there who've lived these rich, amazing lives.
For sure.
And that technology has evolved truly just in the past 2 years in a way that it can unlock their power at scale. Realize we've got something completely new to help us solve some of our biggest societal challenges.
Yeah, I love that. All right, Dr. Isaiah.
Beautiful.
Proud moment.
I think one of my most proud moments that has consistently happened with companies is helping them with our training and implementation supports expand their definition of what work stress looks like. So often we focus on work stress as being a heavy workload or feeling that, you're not being heard by your boss. Those are all work stressors, but we don't necessarily intersect them with important parts of who we are, important identities. We work with the tech company that was having kind of a mass exodus of staff who were really not feeling like they were supported by the leadership. They had a change in a CEO. And we did some listening sessions, training, some coaching with them. And what we learned was that some of the younger junior staff felt that they were doing work that, one, they were just being contracted for, and that they weren't given full-time positions, as well as they felt like the Black and brown and other minority facility-based staff weren't given the same opportunities to move up. And we were able to help that company think about this as a work stressor, as opposed to this is something we can't touch, to facilitate more conversations around it. And it actually made them shift their organizational structure, and their EP&S score, which is the rating at which you want to be at a company or you think a company is at, went up to over 90%. And so we've seen that time and time again, where people in the company don't have that language to be able to say, hey, this is a burden that I'm carrying that you might not be able to see. But now that I can communicate it to you, the company can respond to it in a way that really, really not only helps that individual, but again, for the organization, they don't have to deal with the cost of turnover, because I mean, that's huge when you're losing talent, when you're losing people who you really have invested so much in. And I think one of the most beautiful stories for me in terms of all of this was a pretty high up manager in this government agency, and he said that he just did not believe that they were in a hybrid situation. This staff member that he had worked with was going to, be able to do all the tasks they were asking. They were falling off, and they had some childcare issues and all of that. But based on kind of using this relationship-based approach, he really opened up to the possibility of her being able to do her work in different ways. And he was blown away by not only how much she was able to get done, but how appreciative she was, because she now had the flexibility to be able to be the parent she wanted to be. And again, that's one of those identities that we don't always talk about, but can be playing a role in how we're showing up at work. And so, yeah, for me, it's just been great helping people be their full self at work, and then feel like they have the language to talk about it, and then the company to be able to respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important, again, across all sectors, of people not wanting to be uncomfortable. And that is a deterrent to inclusion, because if you're not willing to be uncomfortable in the sense of having uncomfortable conversations, or just not being in your comfort zone, which is of course how we always kick it off, like it's gonna be a little wacky, like it may take you out of your comfort zone, but in fact it's a laboratory for allowing yourself to be a little bit uncomfortable out of what's comfortable, in order to have these conversations, which ultimately result in feeling a sense of belonging, feeling included. And I think when leadership takes the time to have you guys in, and to have us in for that matter, they're saying, no, we want this, we want you to, we don't know how to do it, but we know that this is going to be better for everybody if we can learn how to be present and hear what you're saying, and be in this uncomfortable moment that I don't know how they didn't teach at business school, help. And to turn it over to have other people come in and facilitate that, so that, and it is to the benefit of the whole culture. And I think the same thing, Dan, is true in the senior space, where people are so uncomfortable with cognitive decline. Now, maybe you could speak a little to that if Eldera has any space for that, but I know that is a big issue globally, is how uncomfortable people are with that. And so they just don't want to be on the Zoom because they're afraid of it, So I don't know.
Yeah, let me address that. There's a very clear research correlation between intergenerational connections and delayed cognitive decline. And I will refer to Dean Linda Fried's study back when she was at Johns Hopkins University. She founded Experience Score, where she asked retired volunteers to go into schools, into third grade in particular, and help kids learn how to read. And she measured the cognitive well-being of older adults before, during, and after the intervention, not just qualitatively, but also with fMRIs. And what she was able to show, and now it's an NIH study, is that intergenerational connections halt, and in some cases reverse, early cognitive decline in older adults. So by staying connected with young people and learning the top 40 and reading all the Harry Potter and understanding like Pokemon, which I don't understand, but older adults do now, you maintain your cognitive health longer, which adds scale. completely changes the conversation around how we age. And that's truly our goal. Because when we keep older adults engaged in society longer, it delays their need for care. There's another study talking about purpose, ran by our friend of Eldera, Eric Kim, when he was at Harvard. He showed that when older adults follow their purpose, it delays cardiac events substantially. Those two are the biggest costs that that Medicare has to deal with in the US and globally. So it's interesting that it's wired in us to do better by the younger generation because it keeps us healthier longer. How beautiful is that? Humanity.
I'm super moved by that. I'm gonna try not to cry, but my mother and my father-in-law each lived alone for 15 years, and they each had cognitive decline. They each had Alzheimer's. They each died of Alzheimer's. So it really, it gives me pause that there could have been a different way. Now, they were both very difficult people. God bless their souls. They lived, they were that very perfectionist kind of people, and things have to be a certain way. And so it wasn't easy to be around them, but maybe if they'd had more exposure to younger, they would have had to be more flexible. And that would have contributed to their cognitive health. So I think it's super interesting what you're talking about, Dan. I mean, I've lived it, so I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really love that perspective of being able to help people be sensitive to others' loneliness in a way that allows you to kind of be aware of the world around you. Because a big part of my focus and what we do in our work that I'm hearing from you, Dana, that you have built into your work is how do we really socialize or help people develop compassion for others and compassion for themselves. I find that a lot of the reasons why people can't have these difficult conversations is because there is a lack of awareness of just what the pain is others are experiencing. Compassion is the awareness of pain and then being willing to do something to alleviate it, which is actually different than empathy. Empathy is like, I see your pain, but you don't actually have a mandate to alleviate that pain in some way. And a big part of around why I think compassion is there's a deficit in our country and in our world that we need to really build on is because we're so focused on surviving that you don't have space to feel the pain of others because you're feeling your own pain. And the more that we can start to become aware of all the different, and this is a part of inclusion, right? Understanding your pain may be different than my pain, but is no less important than my pain. And being able to really lean into that, you actually start to have more space in order to not only connect with one another, but also meet some of your own needs. We know, research on the reward centers of the brain, the same things that make us feel excited, altruism does as well. It activates those parts of the brain and it allows us to really feel deeply connected. And so, a big part of what we work on, especially around the uncomfortable conversations, is how can you lean into self-compassion? Because a big reason why people are afraid of some of these conversations is because they're really hard on themselves and they're afraid of making mistakes. But the more that you can direct compassion towards yourself, and especially towards specific identities that you feel insecure about. I feel insecure as a CEO. I feel insecure as, an elder. I feel insecure as a LGBT person, whatever it may be. If you feel insecure in that space and say, I'm not doing this right, you have a very rigid perspective of what it looks like to do right. When you apply compassion to it and say, wow, this may be a pain I'm experiencing, I'm going to take off the pressure a little bit. You now find that you have the energy, the emotional energy to actually lean into something that may have been difficult and withstand it, have that resilience that we've been talking about to withstand it over time. I always like to use the example, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, Humpty Dumpty had a big fall, right? And no one could put them back together again. And my question I always ask myself is, what if Humpty was boiled? Like if Humpty was boiled, then he wouldn't have scattered everywhere. And I think part of the reason why I say that is I think so much of resilience is putting ourselves in hot water, putting ourselves in situations that allow us to develop that skin. And then when we do have the falls, we're not scattered. We may have some nicks, but we can withstand it. And that's what leaning into some of these uncomfortable conversations are about.
Yeah, I'm super curious if you've ever worked with a CEO who says, you know, I feel really vulnerable about it's so antithetical to what the expectation of being how we perceive a leader to be.
And that's actually it though, because to your point, I have worked with leaders, and you all see this all the time, people who have such a narrow perspective of what it means to be a leader, what it means to be in charge. And that perspective is, I either need to be right or I need to have all the answers. But part of the way that you actually get them to the point of showing up differently is you expand that definition. And you help them understand, and people start to create an identity around a leader is someone who finds answers instead of has answers. Finding answers is different than having answers. And so you reframe that enough so that now, oh, that's a part of who I am. I find answers. I'll find answers by asking people. I'll find answers by talking to this person. And then we'll get to the answer together. You're a leader. Your identity is expanded around how you see this perspective.
Yeah, okay. That works.
I
can see how that would work. I mean,
sometimes.
Yeah, right. It's all sometimes, right? It's all
Yeah.
sometimes. So if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. We'd be happy to take them and answer them to the best of our ability. Yeah, I mean, imperfection is such a big facet of comedy that, you know, and being and caregiving for sure, being able to work with what is rather than what you want it to be, particularly when you're taking care of older people, because they have their own spirit and they're going to want to do what they want to do, and how wonderful, and you want to celebrate that rather than shut it down. And so learning how to improvise, it's such an important tool actually in all of this. So here we have a question here. Let's see. Our veterans are dealing with unforgettable trauma. Here, ideas that just will add to our veterans' lives. Oh, okay, cool. We're gonna add to veterans' lives with ideas and suggestions. Anyone have any thought? I'm curious, Dana, do you have many veterans in your program?
We do have some, and we would love the opportunity to partner officially with the Veterans Association, because these individuals have lived incredible lives and can impart some of that with young people. And we value veterans tremendously at Eldera. We've had amazing ones in the group. I'll tell you a funny story. One of our questions when you sign up for Eldera, as a mentor or as a young person, is we ask you what your superpower is. And the answers vary anywhere from like resilience and courage and empathy to time travel and visibility. And I'm like, oh, you're going to be a fun one. All the way to what kind of question is that? And that answer is an 89-year-old veteran. And we love him for that, because that is he has such a like pragmatic personality. We paired him up with a kid who's just like him, and they get along so well. But it's really, really fun to kind of see the different perspectives that each life's journey and life story brings to a person. So thank you for sharing that, and please do reach out, because we are actively looking to partner with veterans at scale.
Yeah.
And I think just
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
You go. No, I was just going to say, from a trauma lens, you know, I've done a lot of work with trauma in the past, and so much of post-traumatic growth, which is a potential outcome that comes after experiencing trauma, is how we start to reconnect with ourselves and others and find meaning through the trauma, and the opportunity to have storytelling with people you feel safe with and is not triggering for you when you're having those experiences really starts to not only solidify those relationships, but it helps people grow an expanded understanding of themselves so that they can show up differently. And so I just love this idea one that you're sharing, Dana, but also to the comment in the chat around being able to use some of these resources of social connection to help people have a different perspective of their story. Because part of what PTSD is trauma becomes your whole story instead of just a part of it. And when people start to heal from it, it's not like the story doesn't exist, but it doesn't consume them. And these connections allow you to kind of really expand on that in different ways.
Yeah. So, and I think also to speak to what you were saying, Dana, about that response, like, what do you do? What do you mean? Whoa. It was authentic. Do you know?
It was,
You saw
yeah.
him. And
Yeah.
when someone feels safe enough, and I think this is one of the gifts of being older, my experience in the way senior world is like I teach a memoir class to 85 to 100-year-olds, and I have for 4 years. And their stories are remarkable, and they'll just say whatever. If I give them a note about a story, they're like, no, I don't, I'm not,
Yeah, so
afraid
great.
to.
And
Yeah.
doesn't it save so much time and energy? It's like, yeah, tell me, like, then I won't do that.
Yes. Yeah. So I think it is such an opportunity. I love that. Leanne, thank you for bringing up the veteran community. We really everyone wants to work with them. So we got to make sure because we so appreciate them and their stories and their experiences. So that's wonderful. We're going to wrap in a few minutes. So I have an interesting question just around the word inclusion. And I'm wondering, does it mean something different than it did, say, 10 years ago? Like, how are we approaching inclusion? How do we have to approach inclusion now in a way that we didn't, if we haven't already answered that? And if anyone has a thought about that. I think for you, Dr. Isaiah, like going into these cultures in the kind of DEI world or post-DEI world, how are we addressing if inclusion is addressed differently? But we do have some cool questions in the chat, so you just answer that quickly.
Go ahead. Real quick, I'll just share. I think it has evolved over the past 10 years. I think it's something that has been driven in a grassroots way for folks trying to fit into spaces. I think what has evolved is there has been a clear kind of both business case and a clearer kind of understanding from people who have power in their organizations that this does provide a strength to organizations. But with that, it's created, a lot of challenges because there's limited resources and people are wondering why are we using our resources on this over others. So yes, there's some of the divisive nature of DEI, but I also, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I think the fact that we're having this conversation and that we're having it without people needing to advocate for themselves. There's other people who are in positions of power wanting to bring inclusion into the workplace and understand how it impacts. It shows we're evolving and hopefully creating a space where we don't tolerate other people, but we truly try to understand them and value them in the workspace.
Yeah, yeah. Dana, anything to say about that? Not that, or inclusion, or
We think of inclusion very differently at Eldera. What we've learned from our data is that we build the best bonds from people who are most different. And that's a little counterintuitive, right? Because people thought, oh, you have to put together people that are the same. No. In fact, the more different two people are, it's the opposite of social media, if you want. They feel really special because they're so different and they feel very curious about the other person. And it creates this really beautiful, strong, long-term bond. 72% of our matches talk for over a year, weekly. Many of them talk over 4 years now. This is what we look at. We don't ask specific questions that have to do with diversity and inclusion. But what we've realized once we pair them is that the more different they are, the stronger the bond. And that was something I had to fight for. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think, character is action, right? Not words. Like you can talk about you can throw these words around, but if the culture doesn't support it, it's just you know, kind of a lot of blah blah. So I think that, you know, it's the actions, it's them picking up the phone and reaching out, and it's people bringing you in, Dr. Isaiah, and saying, yeah, we really do want tools and we really want to change our culture. So the one question before we go is, do either of you have role models or any kind of mentor, visionary who inspires you?
Do you want to go first, Dana, or you want me to pop in? Go ahead, you go first.
I'll jump in. The first thing that I was thinking about was my mentor and mother figure, Linda, who passed away. But then I'm incredibly inspired by just really wonderful figures that I see out there, like Melinda French Gates, Michelle Obama. I look up to them and how they spend their time. But then on a day-to-day basis, I'm inspired by our mentors and our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so fortunate because I feel like, you know, I'm the most junior person on our team, even though I'm the CEO. And I love it. And I'm so inspired by everyone who works with us and sees our vision and the impact we're making in the world, sometimes even more astutely than I do.
Well, and I'm
So
gonna get to meet them tomorrow because
I
we
know,
are,
I'm so excited. Thank you so much for
yes,
joining.
Laughter on Call is going to celebrate Dana's birthday with all of these people. It's going to be, oh, I'm going to be just I would say so, a pig in mailed. Okay, I'm going to be so happy. Dr. Isaiah, what about you for mentor, visionary?
Yeah, I'm going to bring it full circle. My parents are still two of the most important people in my life: retired vice principal, retired social worker, who just made a huge impact on the world around us and me and my family. But I think in addition to that, just being in the spaces that I've been in, I've been inspired by the people I work with, who really show me that no matter how different we are, to your point, Dana, there is the possibility for growth, for change. I think we sometimes get so stuck in this is who the person is and that's it. But the people I've been able to work with who say, okay, I'm going to try this thing. And they're like, oh, I can show up differently. This person can show up differently. It always inspires me.
Excellent, excellent. And I'm just going to say caregivers to me, total inspiration to show up every day, not knowing what's going to happen and be present and of service. The very, very impressive through both my parents' illnesses. I just was really, it was awestruck by that. So that's how we're going to close. I think we're going to close on awesome and awesomeness. And certainly I feel that way about both of you and what you're bringing to the world, and that you took the time to be with us today. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you to our audience for coming. And it will be up on YouTube if there's anyone you want to forward this information to. So thank you so much. And we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Right,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks
guys.
for having me.
Yay.
Bye, y'all.